All right. Well, it's good to have everybody here this morning. Let me thank you for being here. This is going to be our 1 hour webinar that is going to deal with gathering project requirements and conducting a structured interview. I'm Keith Mathis, and so if you've not heard me speak before or been attended any of our training, I'm Keith Mathis with the Mathis Group, and so we provide training around the country for this, and I teach at universities and different things like this. Uh, One of the things that we will be looking at as we talk about this. Now, some of you have just signed in and said no sound. Can you guys hear me? Give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. Okay, good, good. Okay, perfect. All right. So one of the challenges that we get into a lot of times when we get into to gathering requirements or starting a project is this whole issue of gathering requirements. How to gather requirements and get the requirements up front, especially if you're doing a traditional project. Now, if you're doing an agile project or Scrum or something like that, you're getting requirements as you go along a lot of times. But for a traditional project, and that's what we'll focus on for this, we're looking at gathering project requirements up front so that you're not getting in the middle of a project and then discovering that here are all of these requirements that nobody knew about. In order to do that, or one of the things that we will teach in doing this, we teach what's called a structured interview. And so let me start with showing you a customer funnel of how those interview questions happen so that you'll be able to kind of get a framework of what we're talking about here. Now, you'll notice that as we start interviewing the customer, this is not something you're doing off the cuff. This is something that you're doing, that you're trying to do to really get the specifics of the customer. And as we all know, you've got good customers, but many times the customer does not know exactly what they want, or they haven't thought through everything. And so your interview is going to be fleshing out many of these pieces. So you'll notice on this funnel here, we start with open questions. That's open-ended questions is what that is. We then move into closed questions. Then we'll paraphrase it. Then we'll summarize it. And that's leading toward the scope that you see there at the bottom of your page. Okay, so here's how this works. And I'll show you some samples a little bit later here. But open-ended questions is questions that cannot be answered by yes or no. It's going to be something to where you get the customer talking about their project. You get them explaining what they're really wanting to accomplish, not just like giving an order at McDonald's. I want pickles, lettuce, and tomato. That's not what you're wanting. You're wanting them to be able to tell you a little bit about what they're trying to do, what they're hoping to do in the long run, what their ultimate goal is with this. Then, when you start thinking that you're getting a requirement from them, that's where the closed question comes in. And so you start saying, okay, Mr. or Mrs. Customer, are you talking about this or this? Is this a little bit more like what you're talking about? So you notice that you're funneling those requirements down. And then you'll paraphrase some of that back. Okay, so if I understand what you're wanting your software to be able to do this, this, and this at this kind of speed or this kind of metric or whatever the case may be. And that customer is going to say yes or no. Then you go right back into the open close paraphrase. The open close paraphrase functions very much like an Oreo cookie. You've got your outside and you've got your in, but in the middle, you've got the white, which is going to be that closed question. So I do open, closed, paraphrase over and over again until I feel like I've got the requirements. One of the last questions I will ask the customer too is there anything that would be good for me to know about this project that I haven't asked you? Or is there any requirement that we haven't talked about that really is making a big difference, will make a big difference with this project? So that is a wide open question for the customer to tell you anything that they're wanting to tell you. And then at the very end is summarize. I summarize that list of those requirements that I've been paraphrasing to that customer all the way through. And then you'll notice the next piece is that's your scope or that's your requirement package is really what it is. And so I know it's pretty simple what I'm showing you here, and it's much harder in real life. I understand that. But the point is, if we don't have any structure, then we're just kind of doing it on a wing and a prayer, and we're just kind of shooting from the hip. Now, let me show you what I'm talking about with some of the questions. This is not something that I send out to the customer, okay? When we talk about questions in a moment, it's not something I send out to the customer and have them fill out. I want to hear them. If I can't be there face to face, I'm going to do it through a video or something to be able to interview them. So here's some benefits of conducting the requirements interview. You can identify the real needs, requirements, and goals of the project. You can determine the steps of action to fulfill those requirements. You can know ahead of time the real measurements of success, how the customer is measuring success. You can gain real help from your team in reaching the goal faster. You can prioritize the requirements for better tracking, and you can increase your chance of success by knowing the goals and requirements up front. Nothing frustrates all of us more than to get in the middle of the project and all of a sudden you're sitting in a meeting and here comes a requirement that nobody caught. And we've all start looking at each other, and we've all been there. So it's not a situation of being bad people. It's just a matter of it's very frustrating to all of us to be able to experience that. Now, here's some steps in conducting a structured interview. Lay the proper foundation, explain that conducting the interview is part of guaranteeing success, make the event as relaxed as possible. You're going to want to take some notes and make comments back and forth because you're facilitating this with that customer. You're going to be supportive. You're going to be nodding your head. All of the supportive type of behaviors are going to be there because you want this to be as relaxed as possible. But you're wanting to get detail. That means you're asking those probing questions because you don't want to miss something here. And so if it's a little gray to you here, it's going to be even grayer when you start trying to flesh out those requirements with the team. So you're going to want to make sure that you really ask those hard questions right here. Okay, so here's the method for gathering those requirements that we're talking about. Well, many people will do surveys, interviews, focus groups, best practices. Some people will interview the manager or the SME. All of these are appropriate for certain type of projects. But even with us doing all of this, one of the frustrations is that we still get in the middle of the project, and a lot of times we find out new requirements that we have not expected. Okay, so let's talk about some of these methods. Right now, there seems to be a big push, and maybe your organization's different, so I'm not trying to be critical, but many times we have a big push to do a survey. And so that means that a customer gets into the pipeline, whatever the mechanism is to get into the pipeline asking for a project, and we send them a survey of what do they want. So they give some type of description of the scope of work. Now, many people will take that and that becomes the project scope, and they run with the project. There's a challenge with that, though, and the real challenge is that you're banking everything on the fact that, first off, the survey had everything in it to give us the scope, and secondly, that the customer answering the question knew all the scope up front. And that's one of our big challenges as we get into this. So the strength of a survey is it's fast, it can be sent to large groups, consistency of questions, the interviewee can give individual details. The weakness of this, though, is that the questions might not be customized for their particular project that they're needing. The people might not respond to the survey or might not respond with complete ideas like what you're needing, and the interviewee might not give enough detail, and it could be that they're not giving enough detail because they don't know. They don't know it all. We've all sat there and we all know how it kind of evolves. We want this, but then as we start hearing other things, we think, oh, well, it needs that as well. So we get caught into those things. So a survey is a great tool to get it into the pipeline, but it's not normally, if the project has any substance, it's probably not the best tool to be able to really get the scope of work. And so you're going to want to watch that. Now, in your circumstance, it might be different, but in most cases, that's the case. All right, so let's go to the interview piece. The strength of the interview is the questions can be customized based on the type of project and type of customer I have. It's interactive, and so it's a discussion. The customer is able to give me feedback. They're able to talk with me. The meeting can take as long as needed as we work through this. The weakness of the interview is I might be interviewing the wrong person. And most of you who've done this for a long time, you know what I'm talking about. It's good people. It's the person that they've assigned to talk to you about the project, but it might not be the best person in giving us the requirements. The interviewee might not be the expert in the project area, and the time needed to discuss the project, a lot of times you'll find yourself very limited on how much time you're going to be able to talk with them. And so they're going to give you an hour. Well, that hour might not be enough time to really be able to flesh this project out. So an interview is a great way of doing it. Focus groups. Many people will use a focus group. Its specific stakeholders can be grouped together for this. And so a focus group could be individual team members we've pulled together who are experts in this area. The group can be creative. They can build on each other's ideas. Numerous requirements can be gathered quickly. It's a great tool to use. The weakness, though, is that the group might distort the requirements because of personal bias. It takes time to get the group together, and it's taking them away from other projects, or it's taking them away from their daily duties. And then the biggest thing, and just kind of once again, not critical, but just kind of watch for this. Strong personalities can lead the group in the wrong direction. They can be extremely negative or extremely positive about certain type of requirements, and that can actually skew the requirements of what you're needing or where you're really wanting to go. The other method of gathering requirements is trying to align with best practices. Everyone understands the culture, the environment, the processes have been used, and they're proven to work. Current employees are experts in how to conduct business. The weakness, though, is that the processes might be outdated. They might be a best practice now, but they might not be innovative for the future. And where you're seeing this, and many of you that are in the technology area that's on this call, one of the ways that you're seeing this is with that cutting edge stuff. The best practices have worked great in the past, but where you're wanting to go, it's places that nobody has ever gone before. It's going to require new processes, new procedures nobody's even thought about. And you're putting stuff into effect, and software or new products into effect and into the pipeline that's going to require different type of thoughts, different type of processes to support them. There might be a newer set of best practices which can make the organization stronger, but no one looks for it, and it can be very time consuming with the best practices. Best practices work well because they've been tested. The newer products, the newer innovative things that we're trying to do, this might be a challenge for you. So nothing wrong with learning from the best practice. Don't mistake what I'm saying here, but understand that this might not be the best practice for your new innovative project that you're trying to do. You might have to do it differently than you've ever done it before. All right. Then, of course, interviewing the manager or the customer sponsor or the PMO, whoever that individual is. We've all gotten into that situation to where the project's coming in the pipeline. You see this a lot in internal projects that all of us have participated in. The strength is they have authority. They know the strategic goal and objective of what this project is supposed to accomplish. They know the current systems. They know the current processes. Usually they have authority to where they're even involved in the funding. So you've got some authority with who you're talking with. So this is a very important person to talk with. The weakness, though, is that could be limited. They could be limited in their expertise for that project. They might need new core competencies for the future of the organization, and it might be beyond what we have setting here. Once again, you'll find managers and PMOs, and you'll find sponsors who are good people, and they're part of that project team. But some of the questions that you might ask might be very, very niche-oriented questions especially in the technology area. So we have to have that flexibility to, yes, interview the manager. That's the person who has the authority. But also you're talking to that network engineer who really has the down and nitty-gritty stuff that you're really needing for the project in that particular case. So we've got to have some of those flexibilities there. So as you can tell, as we're going through this, and this will be, as we talk about SMEs, all of these have strengths and weaknesses. And part of interviewing the customer is making sure that we're able to interview who we need to interview. So the SME, the subject matter expert, if you're not familiar with the acronym SME, the strength is they're an expert in the field. They understand the internal processes, the systems. They can go deep with the requirements. What's the weakness of interviewing a SME? Well, they might be too specific in some areas and know very little about other areas. Because once again, a SME is a subject matter expert in this area. Limited in time to give data. A lot of times SMEs are swamped because they're being pulled in so many different directions with so many different projects. So to get a face-to-face or to get any time with a SME is very, very difficult because usually you have very few SMEs and a lot of places they need to be. So when you get in front of this person, you do not want to waste any time. You want this to be something that's going to be click. You know what you're asking them. You know the follow-ups that you're needing to come back with. So you've planned this out. So as we talk about this interview, you'll notice that's one of the pieces I'm bringing together here is we want to be able to bring it together and take the whoever we're interviewing, take their time, but at the same time, we're wanting it to click along because we've done due diligence on our side. Now, when we talk about interviewing with questions, they allow the customer to be part of the interaction, whoever the customer is, internal, external. Emotional, psychological bonding comes from this type of interaction because the customer has skin in the game, you have skin in the game. As a project manager or as a team or as a business analyst, you've got skin in the game to be able to interview these people, and they've got skin in the game. All right, so some questions. When you're asking questions, it builds rapport, it builds empathy. You've got to be somebody who has some good listening skills, and listening is more than just hearing the words. You want to look at the facial expression, you want to look at the body language, you want to hear what they're saying and how they're saying some things. And so that will help you be able to know what you're coming back with. You might notice by expression that they've really emphasized something 2 or 3 times, and that might be a question point. Okay, I've noticed you've said this 3 times. Give me a little more detail on this because this sounds like it's a real emphasis for you. All right, so questions move the customer toward a decision. You're talking them toward that decision, and it's going to actually convince them, him or her, either one, of what they want, but it also allows you to be able to visualize what they want. Now, many customers are still fleshing some of this out. They have a general idea, but it might not be as specific as what you want. And so your questions will sometimes generate more questions in their mind rather than less. And that's okay. That's part of it. They test one's understanding to make sure you're being understood. And questions feed you information that's going to give leverage of understanding. Do you want this or this? And those interview questions are going to make a difference on what you're asking based on how they respond, based on how they say certain things. Okay. Now, when we talk about questions, we're not talking about shooting from the hip. We're talking about creating questions that are very specific to the type of project, maybe even to the type of industry. It might even be specific to the type of area that you're working on. Like if you're a security person and you're concerned about the security of this new product or this new software, those questions might be something that's very specific to one person, maybe not even to the whole team, because you're down in the weeds so much that team might not understand this. So there's going to be those times when there's drill down questions. Each question we create should have somewhere around 3 to 4 follow-up questions for gaining more information, gaining more clarity. Now, you will not ask all 4 of those questions. Okay, so I don't want to freak you out. You're not going to ask all 4. You've got them available, but based on what that customer tells you will make a difference on which of those 4 you're going to come back with that they did not hit. So you might have 4 questions, and they verbally, just through the middle of them sharing things, give you answers to 3 of the 4. So the only one you're going to ask is the one they missed to be able to pick up that piece of information. So this is not something to where this is going to take a 5-hour interview necessarily. So you're going to drill down to make sure that when you leave this meeting, you can eat, breathe, and understand what that customer is trying to accomplish and what their goal is. Now, there's several types of questions here. And we do a full two-day teaching on this, but let me just hit it very briefly. There are feeling questions because some people respond to those better. There's data questions. There's best or least questions. You like this best? You like this least? There's situation questions. What if this happened kind of questions? And there's confirming questions. So we'll hit a few of these just to give you some exposure here to this, okay? And so you can pick and choose depending on your customer, depending on your industry, which of these would fit better for you. So a feeling question would be something very simple, such as how do you feel about the solutions that you're examining? Do you think the employees felt good about that approach? Do you think the team would feel good about this approach if we were able to do this? All those kind of things, those resonate with certain type of individuals in certain type of industries. And so that might be much more appropriate for how you ask that. There's going to be data type questions. What kind of situation are you looking to fix? What are you presently measuring? Give me an idea of what kind of metrics are you looking at right now and what metrics will you have in the future? All of those are data questions because, once again, if they're looking at metrics, certain type of metrics, you want to know that. But if that's not the metrics they're using in the future, you're going to want to know that as well. Let's get you to the next one here. What is a best or a least type of question? What's the best thing about your past system? So let's say your customer is wanting to change systems, as many of you are, or you're updating a system, like I know I hear it in class all the time. So what's the best thing about your past system? And so that way, whatever the best is, they're probably not wanting to lose that. What's the least thing that you like about your present system? And you can do that with anything. So what's the best thing you like about this product or this approach? What's the least thing you like about this product or approach? And it allows you the opportunity to find out from that customer, this is a mainstay. They don't want to lose this. And this one here, this is something that they don't like as much. Situation questions. Situation questions help the customer funnel the answer in a direction which will provide information about his or her challenges. Now, a lot of times we'll ask them about challenges, okay? The problem with that is sometimes the only challenge that we get happens to be the hot potato right now. And many of you have experienced this, and I know, and many of you have talked about this, but ask them about different situations. How would the customer interact with this? What would the customer do if this happens? What's the normal way of them responding right now? That allows you, once again, to understand what that situation is that customer's in or that customer's trying to resolve. Most projects are done either because it's new technology, new innovation, or they're trying to fix a problem that they've had in the past, or they're trying to upgrade the situation so that they don't have problems in the future. So when you understand that most of the time they're trying to fix a problem, a lot of times you want to know what that situation is, because once again, you're trying to fix that. You don't want to do this project and then the customer feel like they really don't have a better resolution than they had before. Then a sample situation question. Explain to me how this is being accomplished today. In the present process, how's this handled? And so what you're doing is you're letting them describe to you what steps they're going through right now. And that way, and of course, if that's not what they want, then you don't want to follow those steps. You're not wanting to get into a situation to where you're automating a bad process. And I hear it from many of you guys all the time in class. The customer comes in and says, here's how we're doing it, but we want it automated. But if it's a terrible process, all you're doing is automating a bad process that's taking 30 days to get through. So you're wanting to be able to look at the process and streamline the process, and then be able to take that process, and then if automation makes sense, then automating something that is going to help that customer and make sense to them. You also have what if questions. This is a tremendous tool for you. And once again, I'm giving you a list of these. You're not going to use every one of these in every interview. I hope you understand that. But I'm trying to just kind of give you a broad perspective here of some things. What if questions can be very impactful, because it allows you to say, what if this happens? And that customer respond right back. Or what if we try to do this? So you could do it from a problem standpoint, or you could do it also from a solution standpoint. Now, what if we gave you this and this? How would that help? Or would that make any difference in your present situation? And that customer is able to take the situation they're hearing from you, and they're also able to apply it to looking at their solution to see whether or not the solution that comes to your mind would help them or benefit them at all. And then the last piece is going to be those confirming questions. They're created to make sure the customer's requirements and project interview are in sync. So what you understand is what that customer is saying and what that customer means, not just what they're saying, but what they mean. And so the customer can clarify the requirements based on situations, scenarios you're giving him or her in the final stages of the interview. So you're able to confirm, this is what they want, I understand what they want, and when I leave this meeting, we're all on the same page. This is going to help us tremendously to be able to do this. Now, let me just give you a real quick little scenario here, and then we're going to move on. Nothing is more sickening to anybody who's ever done this than to be sitting there and interviewing or talking to somebody, let's say the manager of the person you interviewed, and the manager comes out with a statement about what the project's going to accomplish, and you realize that was never part of the interview. And yet the manager thinks that this thing is going to accomplish this, yet your interview has you going in this direction. So there's a disconnect between the person you interviewed and what management thinks the outcome is going to be. And if you sat in that situation, you know what I'm talking about. Now, let me stop for just a second. I want to ask that question. How many of you can give me a thumbs up or a yes, how many of you have sat in that situation and either a manager or somebody else starts describing the project and you realize what they're describing is not based on the interview, the way you understood it from the customer. And so these are like new requirements that are coming into this meeting. How many of you have experienced this? You give me a yes or a thumbs up either way. Yep. Yep. Yes. Okay, good. I want to make sure I was on target here. It is a sick, sick feeling to realize that there's that disconnect there, especially when you've tried very hard to fix it and you've tried very hard to do this. Okay. Now, let me kind of walk through this interview cycle with you one more time and kind of refresh your memory. Remember, we're doing open, closed, paraphrase, and then after we get those questions, we summarize them. And then after we get that, then we feel like we've got the scope of work. And then, of course, normally, depending on your process, you will send it to someone. You will ask them to sign off on it, depending on how formal you need to be with your projects. But that's the process we're talking about. Okay. All right. So here's some sample questions that we might ask. Explain some of the characteristics of the organization's culture. Now, if you happen to be somebody who is working within your organization, you already know the culture. Okay, so you don't need that. But if you're a consultant, and we have consultants who are online with us a lot of times, you might be asking to explain the culture because this is a new customer, new client. Who are the main stakeholders? This always is important. Detail the internal politics surrounding the project. Is this driven by strategic goal? Is this already have funding? Or is this something that's controversial in the organization? Any hidden issues, any hidden agendas that would be good to know about? Now, your customer knows about this a lot of times, and whatever they say, you want to take note of this because that hidden issue or that hidden agenda can make a huge difference. Any major areas of resistance that could hinder or defeat the project. Once again, this could be huge for you because you might have to spend more time communicating, meeting with these folks. You might find yourself having to have breakfast with some of these folks or lunch with some of these people to kind of calm some of that down. Who can motivate? Who can drive the project? That's your champion, and you want to know that. When the project's completed, what should it look like? How should it function? Now, let me talk about this for just a second. This is a very important question because they're describing the end result of that project. So when they describe this project, everything they say here is going to be very important because as you interview them, the requirements they're giving you should be driving toward that question. Once the project's underway, what type of reporting schedule would you prefer? This is part of your communication plan. Who analyzed and set the timetable if you're inheriting a timetable from somebody? Because I want to know, you want it by June 15th. Who came up with June 15th? Or, how did that timetable get there? If it's regulatory, that one makes sense. But if the company just wants it by June 15th, was it actually calculated or did somebody just throw a date out? Do you feel, and sometimes I'll even say, do you feel the timetable is realistic or doable with the present resources? If we discern the timetable or budget is severely off, how do you want us to handle it? Now, that last question there, how do you want us to handle it? We used to ask, can we change it? If we discern the timetable or budget is severely off, can we change it? The answer was always no. So if you're asking a question and you're not getting a response the way you want it, change the question. So then what we said is, how do you want us to handle it? What almost always comes back on that last question is, come back and talk with us and let's see what we can do. We'll work it out. Because they're trying to be realistic too. Your customer is trying to be realistic with this as well. Now, this is if you have a deadline that you're inheriting, not one that you're setting. So you're wanting to be able to give some pushback on that. Now, different types of questions that how to ask questions: paraphrasing, probing, redirecting, bridging, encouraging people, changing view. That's going to be like your devil's advocate. Recalling, summarizing, all of these are pieces that's going to be very important for you. All right, so asking questions. Let's look at open-ended. So these are questions that cannot be answered by yes or no. That's the reason why we start with, from the funnel, go back to the funnel in your head. It's open, closed, paraphrase. So open-ended, you got them talking. When I start thinking I've got an idea of a requirement, I go to closed. And so is this something you could live with as a team? Are these objectives realistic? And so these are more yes or no questions when you go to closed. And so you're funneling those requirements down is what you're trying desperately to be able to do. The probing questions you will find when your customer has come back with something that's kind of a gray kind of requirement. We want it to be more efficient. We want this to be more effective. Well, obviously, we want speed. All of those sound good to the customer and they mean it. But on your side, if you're trying to do a project that's more efficient, more effective, and speed, what are you measuring to? How fast are you doing? What are you doing right now? How fast is it right now? Let's talk about your effectiveness right now. Let's talk about your efficiencies. All of those are kind of gray. The customer has a requirement. They want to be obviously more productive, but you've got to be able to measure where they are compared to where they want to be before you get out of there to be able to come up with that requirement. So that's a probing type question. So, in other words, can you give me more detail? Can you give me some examples? To detail a concern, that's been expressed, to gain insight into important information. That's that probing question. Give me an example of what you're talking about. You want to be more efficient. Where are you now compared to where you want to be? And that little scenario right there allows them to at least verbalize it to where you're starting to think of the metrics in your head, and you can ask more questions about the metrics at that meeting or a little bit later if you need to. But the point is, you're getting a good understanding of what the ultimate goal is through those probing questions. Redirecting questions you'll use when you are working with a team and you're doing a team interview. Now, for some of you, you will do team interviews. And so you're sitting down and you might be talking to somebody who's a network person, somebody who's a software programmer, and somebody who is part of the PMO. So you've got multiple people here. Well, not everybody has the same expertise. And you see the same scenario when you work with the SME. So it's used when questions have been asked maybe of a facilitator or a main person that need to be answered by someone else. So let me flip it. So let's say I'm a customer and I've got 3 people on my team and you're interviewing us for our requirements. So you asked me about programming, something very specific about programming. Well, I've got Jake over here who's a programmer. And so I said, well, that's a great question. Jake, why don't I let you answer that because you're the programmer. So you let that person, because that's more their expertise, or the subject matter expert answer those, or the networking person, and so forth. And so it can be used for redirecting, can be used to where it's almost like a traffic cop. You're switching the answers over to the people who really have the expertise in those areas. And so you're not trying to stonewall a question, but you realize I don't know it all, and that person would have a better understanding of that particular question or that area. And that's what you're going. And then summarizing is where you're kind of pulling it all together. And so it's used to briefly interview or discuss numerous points or issues. It does not always have to be completed by the main person, though. Now, if I'm interviewing someone and I'm getting the requirements, I probably will summarize. But if we're summarizing as a team, anybody on the team could summarize what we've agreed to and what we're going to be doing. But it's used to help us be able to pull those ideas together. You can also use summarizing when you have people show up late for your meeting and you're trying to get them caught up without going blow by blow through everything. So what you're doing is you're saying, okay, hey, Jake, good to have you. And they're apologetic for being late. Here's what we've talked about. Here's where we are in the interview. And that way they've caught up. So you can use it for that as well in this same type of meeting. Now, obviously, you're going to collect data and research, gather as much information on the project, the goals as possible. Make sure the data is relevant. Make sure it's reliable. Sometimes you'll get old data. Gathering data is something new in most cultures because many times people are so used to doing it on a wing and a prayer for these interviews and just kind of walk in and sit there. And that's not what you're wanting to do. Remember, your role is to collect data in order to make recommendations or in order to make decisions on what those requirements are going to be. And so that means that you've got to be that person who's asking the question. You want to ask the hard question on this end of the meeting, not in the middle. Let me say it again. You want to ask the hard questions on this side of the meeting at the very beginning, not in the middle, because the middle is you've already invested so much time and effort going in a direction that might not be correct. Okay, so investigating ideas, you're going to start with open. Tell me about the goals of the project. How does this fit the direction of the organization? And then, of course, you're moving on into diagnosing. If we're looking at diagnosing what to do, maybe we don't know exactly what to do and the customer doesn't know what to do. So it's more open-ended. What is the customer really wanting? That's what you're asking yourself. We know what the customer is saying. Let me say it again. We know what they're saying, but what do they want? And so you've got to be able to get those two connected. What they say might not be what they want. So you're there having to flesh that out. What's needed to achieve the customer's goal that is not being asked. And so you might come back with other questions or other explanations to make sure that you bridge the gap with that customer in diagnosing what it is they're saying compared to what it is they really want. Confirming, if you're looking at open questions, you look at this draft of a plan and see if this will meet your need. What can we adjust to bring this plan more in line with your goals? With confirming, you're taking what you have and you're bringing it to the customer or to the decision maker and making sure that what you think is what they think. And you might find yourself doing that with your customer. Here's a solution we have. We want to talk to you and make some recommendations to you. Here's what we think will work for you. Does that sound like it will work for you? That's a confirming kind of meeting. And so here's the thing. If you're wrong, you want to be wrong as early as possible. Let me say it again. If you're wrong, you want to be wrong as early as possible. You do not want this thing to drag out. You do not want this thing to for you to be invested months into this thing and be wrong about something. You want to be wrong as early as possible. All right. So what's the benefits of diagnosing requirements? Well, both the customer and the project team are going in the same direction. The requirements are clear, they're concise. The project scope is understandable and frozen for progress, and additional requirements for success can be added. Now, by diagnosing this, that means that the person doing the project, or the project manager, or the business analyst understands they can eat, breathe, and understand those requirements, and that's what you're wanting. On the customer side, they feel that they're working with somebody who absolutely understands what's going to be happening with that project. And then the other in diagnosing before you give recommendations, sometimes people come in with a conclusion in their head as they talk to the customer about a project. That's not what you're wanting to have happen. Before you recommend, you have to understand the customer's goal, unspoken requirements for reaching that goal, because there might be some kind of cultural thing that you're having to deal with within that system or within that organization. That customers always have a gap between reaching their goal, and so you're involved to be able to help bridge that gap. And that's what you're trying desperately to be able to do. Now, we've got just a couple of minutes here, so let me pause for a second and answer a few questions before we pull this together. And so any question that you would have, now remember, this is on video, so I just say that not to keep you from asking a question, but to make sure your question is something that you're not going to be embarrassed that's on a video of, okay? So let me get my glasses on so I can read any questions that you might have about this, and then I'll pull this together here in a few minutes. So what questions do you guys have? See, some of you are typing, so I'm pausing for you. It takes a little bit of a delay between you typing and it showing up here. How do you get the SME to attend? How do you get the SME to attend if they're not invited by the facilitator? Okay, this is a difficult thing. One of the things that I might do on that, if I'm really needing the SME to be there and I've caught on that I need it before this meeting, one of my emails would be, I really would like Jake to be there because he's a SME in this area, if we can work it out, because Jake has so many components there. If I don't know until I get to the meeting, then obviously you're going to have another meeting, and that I just kind of make that statement as I'm asking questions. I realize that this SME is somebody we're going to have to pull together, and so usually I'll say, well, in our next meeting, what's the possibility of getting Jake in here, because it looks like Jake and Tom are the two that we really need to have in here too. And you just kind of make the assumption that the goal here is to get the information, and they have the information, so the goal is to get them into a meeting or a video chat or anything, depending on whatever it is. But I do the same thing probably that you're doing as well. I make the assumption they're going to be there. A lot of times the facilitator, and this is Gregory, a lot of times the facilitator, they're there to get it going, but they might not know all the pieces. And so they're, once again, they're good people, but they don't know all the pieces. You're that expert coming in knowing that that SME is a piece of the pie you've got to have. And so if that's been our pattern, I'll even send an email out early and say, hey, it'd be good if we had the SME for networking and the SME for programming in there in this meeting, if at all possible. And so kind of preload who you want in there, in addition to who's going to be in there anyway. So that's just a few things I do. It's probably what you do all the time too, to try to get the right people in the meeting. But that's what you're asking, is how to get the right people in the meeting. And so I'll ask up front if I want certain people in that meeting, or need those certain expertise, there. So I do the same thing. Other questions? Other questions? Is anybody on the call today that's a business analyst? Is anybody on the call today that is a business analyst? All right, for those of you who are going through this, let me just mention to you, I see somebody typing here, and I'll come right back to you as soon as it posts, Melissa. We have 6 BAs in the room. Okay. The BA is doing a lot of this for you. And so let me bridge this gap in case you're not familiar. The business analyst is a person who's responsible for the requirements. They work alongside a project manager in a traditional setting, and they're responsible for the requirements. They're the go-between, really, between the customer and the project team. And so the BA is doing some of this for you, where the project manager does it a lot of times when you don't have a BA. But if you have a business analyst, and this is a growing field, not only in traditional project management, but it's growing also even in over on the agile side. And so the BA is really a representative for the customer mainly, and so they're representing those requirements. And so here's how this works if you're not familiar with it. The BA would be in the room, and so what happens is that the BA is attending our meetings, and anything that's needing to be found out from the customer, the BA is going to that customer for a face-to-face. The BA might do the complete interview and bring back the requirements to the project team, and the project manager might not actually talk to the customer a whole lot, but talk to the BA who's representing the customer in all of those meetings. Now, for those of you who are BAs, and for those of you who are wanting to do a better job of this, besides attending training and some other things, there's a couple of books out. Well, PMI has a book, and then the Business Analyst Association has a book. The Business Analyst Association has a book called BABOK. And so it's the Business Analyst Body of Knowledge. It is excellent. And then PMI also has their book out for their business analyst standard. Both of these are excellent tools. Either one of them you're not going to go wrong with. And so even though you're not a business analyst possibly, but you're still interviewing people, and those skills and those tools are in those 2 texts. And so that gives you an opportunity to be able to give you a couple of resources. So BABOK, and then the other one is the Business Analyst Standard from PMI. So BABOK's a different company. It's not PMI. So BABOK, Business Analyst Body of Knowledge, just type it in on Amazon and you'll pull it up. I think its 3rd edition's out right now. It might be 4th, but I think 3rd edition is out right now. So Business Analyst Body of Knowledge. And then over on the PMI side, you've got the Business Analyst Standard. And so that's going to give you the information. But both are phenomenal tools for this area here, because the BA's role is nothing but requirements. Okay. So Melissa, thank you you got 6 BAs in the room. Good. Good. All right. Any other questions? Any other questions? All right, so let me pull this together. So those of you who are needing the hours, let me just remind you how this will work, is that you will get a link to the video, this video here. So you'll get a link to this so that you'll be able to see this. You'll also, in the email that comes with the video, you'll get your code for your PDU. So you get 1 PDU for attending this, and so you'll get your code for doing this. Now, let me close out with a couple of things here. First off, I'm giving you my 800 number. We have a 2-day course on the Business Analyst Fundamentals. We also have a combination. It's a combination of communication and interview skills for some of these components. It's a 1-day. but it's kind of just it's going to be very brief compared to what we're talking about even in our webinar here for the depth of all these of this content. And then we have an advanced skills on project interviewing, risk, and negotiation. But for a resource for you to help your people go and pick up either the BABOK or the project or the business analyst standard from PMI. Those two tools will help you and help your people be able to do this interview. Now, one final thing, for those of you who are also looking at the PMP is going to be changing in June, and they're going through monstrous changes. And so one of the things that we've always said is that the devil you know is always better than the devil you don't know. So we know what the PMP is doing right now. And so we've got virtual classes, we've got face-to-face classes in St. Louis and Overland Park. So if you're thinking about doing your PMP, you probably want to go ahead and make sure you get it in before June, when it changes in June. So it's kind of open-ended right now. We don't know what all is happening in June, but we know the test is changing. They're talking about PMBOK 7 coming back out, and it's been kind of loose on when that's going to hit and when that's going to kick in. So just as a piece of information. So last minute questions from you before I let you guys go. All right. Well, thank you so much for taking the time of being part of this. Every month we have the webinars. Every month you'll be able to get one PDU if you enjoy this, and so you'll be able to sign up for this, and you'll be able to go to our website. We've got one coming up on negotiation, and we've got them booked throughout the year. So just go to our website, and you'll have an opportunity to see that and bring people in if you'd like to be able to do this. I hope it comes through good on your side. Once again, you'll get the video to be able to look at this as well. So thank you guys for taking an hour out of your time. God bless you. Have a great Christmas with your family. So you guys have a wonderful holiday season. Bye now. Thank you again.